July 25th, 1944. 9:37 a.m. Along a narrow dirt road near the French town of Saint-Lô, the morning air is thick with humidity and an uneasy, suffocating silence. Thousands of American infantrymen crouch inside muddy foxholes, checking their M1 Garand rifles for the 10th time. Tank crews sit in the claustrophobic hulls of their Shermans, engines idling, breathing in fumes and sweat. Everyone knows that what happens in the next 60 seconds will decide the fate of the Second World War in Europe. Then, at exactly 9:38 a.m., the silence is obliterated. The sky begins to vibrate. A low rumble grows into a deafening, terrifying wall of sound as nearly 2,500 Allied aircraft, heavy bombers, medium bombers, and fighter bombers block out the sun. In a matter of minutes, they unleash one of the most concentrated aerial bombardments in human history, dropping over 4,000 tons of high explosives onto a tiny 5-mile strip of the German front line. For 7 grueling weeks, the Allied invasion of Europe had been utterly paralyzed. But on this morning, the Americans are about to drop the hammer. This is Operation Cobra, the high-risk, catastrophic gamble that finally shattered Hitler's grip on Normandy. Most people believe that once the Allied troops stormed the beaches on June 6, 1944, victory in France came quickly. But that couldn't be further from the truth. Beyond the secured landing zones lay the Norman countryside, known to the locals as the Bocage. For centuries, French farmers had divided their fields with massive earthen banks, some nearly 10 feet high, bound together by the thick tangled roots of ancient trees and dense shrubs. Narrow sunken roads wound between these barriers, creating natural subterranean trenches. To the advancing Allies, Normandy was not an open plain. It was a labyrinth of infinite fortresses. Every single hedgerow was a ready-made bunker. Every field had to be fought for, bled for, and captured one at a time. The German defenders knew exactly how to exploit this terrain. Hidden behind the thick earth banks, German machine gun teams waited silently until American infantry came within point-blank range. Mortars rained down with pinpoint accuracy, while snipers targeted officers and radio operators. In this green hell, tanks could rarely see more than a few dozen yards ahead. Every advance was a deadly gamble. Progress slowed to a crawl. On some sectors of the front, American units were losing a man for every 3 meters of hedge they cleared. To the east, British and Canadian forces under General Bernard Montgomery launched repeated brutal offensives around the strategic city of Caen. The fighting there was a bloodbath, but it served a vital strategic purpose. It forced the Germans to keep the absolute bulk of their elite panzer divisions concentrated on defending Caen, preventing them from reinforcing the American sector to the west. But even with the German armor pinned down, the Americans were reaching their breaking point. Supplies were bottlenecked. A violent storm in the English Channel had damaged the temporary Mulberry harbors, delaying vital reinforcements. The front had stalled. Some Allied commanders quietly feared the campaign was sinking into a horrific stalemate, a repeat of the static trench warfare of the First World War. Lieutenant General Omar Bradley, commander of the U.S. First Army, knew that continuing these slow, costly infantry attacks would destroy his army. He needed to shatter the German line in one decisive blow. His answer was Operation Cobra. Bradley's plan was a masterclass in concentration of force. Instead of attacking across a broad front, he would focus overwhelming combat power on a narrow 5-mile sector just west of St. Lo. Once a gap was blasted in the German line, American armored divisions would surge through the breach, bypassing the hedgerows entirely and returning to fast-moving maneuver warfare. But Bradley had a massive tactical problem. How do you get tanks through the Bocage without exposing their vulnerable underbellies to German anti-tank guns? Enter Sergeant Curtis Cullen, an innovative American engineer. Cullen designed heavy steel prongs, fashioned from scrap iron, salvaged from German beach obstacles, and welded them directly to the front of the M4 Sherman tanks. They called them Rhino tanks. These modified beasts didn't climb over the hedgerows. They punched straight through them, slicing through centuries-old roots and earth in a single, violent motion. Bradley recognized the value of this invention immediately and kept it a closely guarded secret. Nearly 60% of the First Army's Shermans received the Rhino modification in total secrecy. Tank crews were strictly forbidden from using them in combat until the morning of the offensive, preserving the ultimate element of surprise. The forces assembled for Operation Cobra were staggering. The American strike force consisted of 8 infantry divisions and 3 armored divisions, numbering well over 100,000 men. They were backed by an armored armada of over 3,400 vehicles, including 1,269 M4 Sherman medium tanks, 694 Stuart light tanks, and nearly 300 tank destroyers. Supporting them were more than 1,000 artillery pieces, with 140,000 artillery shells allocated for the opening barrage alone. By contrast, the defending German 7th Army was severely depleted, fielding just 3 understrength divisions and fewer than 200 operational tanks and assault guns across the entire breakthrough sector. The stage was set and the trap was laid. But to spring it, Bradley had to rely on a force he could not control: the strategic bombers of the Allied air forces. The true hammer of Operation Cobra was designed to strike from the sky. Bradley requested an unprecedented concentration of air power. The plan called for heavy bombers to saturate a rectangular box behind the German lines, turning the defensive zone into a wasteland. But on July 25th, the wind shifted. As over 1,500 B-17 and B-24 heavy bombers roared over Normandy, thick clouds of dust and smoke from the initial fighter-bomber strikes began to drift back over the American lines. Due to a tragic miscommunication, the bombers flew perpendicular to the front lines rather than parallel. Several lead bombardiers mistook the drifting dust for the target zone. They toggled their bomb bays. Thousands of tons of high explosives rained down directly onto the waiting American troops of the 9th and 30th Infantry Divisions. The friendly fire disaster was catastrophic. 111 American soldiers were killed instantly, and nearly 500 were wounded. Among the dead was Lieutenant General Lesley J. McNair. He was the highest-ranking American officer to be killed in the entire war, and a tragic casualty of the chaos of friendly fire. But there was no time to grieve. The whistles blew. Through the burning smoke and the craters left by their own bombers, thousands of American infantrymen climbed out of their trenches and charged forward into the unknown. The Americans expected to find nothing but dust and dead men in the German trenches. Instead, they ran directly into a wall of fire. The carpet bombing had caused unimaginable destruction, virtually wiping out the German frontline command posts and burying defensive positions. But the survivors, hardened veterans of the elite Panzer-Lehr Division and the 5th Parachute Division, dragged themselves out of the collapsed bunkers. They manned their remaining machine guns and opened fire. The battle for the villages around Saint-Lô became a savage, room-by-room struggle for survival. American rifle squads moved carefully down narrow streets, littered with broken bricks and shattered roof tiles. A soldier would kick open a door. Another tossed a grenade into the darkness. The explosion shattered the walls, and the squad rushed inside through the dust. In these French stone homes, the fighting was brutal and intimate. Soldiers fought on staircases, in basements, and across smashed furniture, firing at point-blank range. Meanwhile, out in the fields, the secret weapon was finally unleashed. Rhino-equipped Sherman tanks charged the hedgerows, tearing through the ancient earth walls. Instead of staying trapped on the narrow, mined roads, the armor burst unexpectedly into the fields, flanking German anti-tank teams who suddenly found American tanks appearing in their rear. By the end of the first day, General Bradley was deeply concerned. His forces had advanced barely 2 kilometers. But beneath the surface of the battlefield, the German defense was hemorrhaging. The sheer violence of the initial air bombardment and subsequent artillery strikes had shattered the German communications network. Radios were dead. Telephone lines were severed. German commanders had no idea where their units were, or if they even still existed. On July 26th, Bradley made a critical decision. He didn't wait for the front line to be cleared. He committed his heavy armor. The legendary 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One, alongside the powerful 2nd Armored Division, charged directly into the fray. They bypassed the stubborn, isolated pockets of German resistance and drove deep into the enemy rear. Above them, Allied fighter bombers hunted with relentless fury. Any German tank, truck, or artillery piece that dared to move on the roads during daylight was instantly targeted by rockets and machine gun fire. By July 27th, the German front did not just bend, it snapped. In just 3 days, the stalemate of Normandy was shattered. The once mighty Panzer-Lehr Division, which had held the line for weeks, was virtually annihilated. It lost over 1,000 men to the carpet bombing alone, and its commander, Lieutenant General Fritz Bayerlein, later described the Saint-Lô sector as a moonscape, reporting that 70% of his personnel were dead, wounded, or driven mad by the sheer violence of the assault. Operation Cobra had cost the Americans nearly 18,000 casualties. But for the Germans, the losses were catastrophic. More than 12,000 German soldiers lay dead, and over 28,000 were marched off into captivity. The wall of the Bocage, which had trapped the Allies for 7 agonizing weeks, was gone. Through the gaping hole in the German lines, General George S. Patton's newly activated Third Army poured into the open French countryside, launching a lightning-fast armored blitzkrieg that would liberate Paris, sweep across France, and carry the Allied armies directly to the borders of Nazi Germany. The road ahead would still be long, bloody, and fraught with sacrifice. But after Operation Cobra, there was no turning back. The gates of occupied Europe had been kicked wide open, and the ultimate downfall of Hitler's empire had officially begun. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the battle that broke the Normandy stalemate, hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments. Do you think the Allies could have won in France without the high-risk gamble of carpet bombing? Thank you for watching. and we'll see you in the next chapter of history.